My mother would tell me that I was drawing before I was speaking, and I don't know if that was a literal truth or just a romantic notion she was trying to instill in me. I was always drawing as a kid. I was picked on a lot, but people would see my artwork, and I get a certain amount of respect even from you know, a lot of the jocks in school who used to tease me. You know, they would say nice things. That's one of the advantages, I guess, of growing up and pursuing something that you love, even if you're not the best at it, even if you can't make the best living. You know, you keep at it and keep surviving, and if you're able to do what you love, you know, you're very lucky, and I'm very lucky. My name is Adam McDaniel. I'm an illustrator, and I have been drawing and loving movies all my life. I have always loved artwork. I've always loved movies, and a big part of the movie-going experience for me all my life was seeing the movie posters. That was a big thrill. And film and entertainment were frequently the subjects of my art and illustration. And as a child, my mother would often see me, you know, drawing, and she would roll her eyes and say, "Oh my God, Adam, can't you just paint landscapes?" But my philosophy is you paint what you love, and you draw what you love. And I've always loved movies. I've always been a humongous fan of the late artists Richard Emzo, Bob Peak, John Alvin, Saul Bass. Drew Struzan is really the last of the greats, and he's somewhat retired now. But as a child, I would often do sketches and illustrations trying to emulate their work, and here I am decades later, you know, pretty much still doing it. One person once called me the Richard Emzo wannabe. She meant it as an insult. I took it as a compliment. I've always loved Amsel's work, and it's something that I've always taken inspiration from. I did not go to art school. I went to Vassar College, and I studied film, cinematography. I was in one art class for one day, and I knew I was going to hate it. Just the philosophy they had was, I knew something that just would not appeal to me. But they did have a very, very strong art history program. And I also started taking theatrical set design as an alternative. When I was a freshman, a senior who was graduating, who has now gone on to become a professional and Tony-nominated set designer, you know, he had 2 words of advice, and he was somewhat drunk at the time, but he meant it with sincerity. He says, take Gesick. Gesick was Thaddeus Gesick, professor of theatrical set design, and in many ways he became my mentor, and I learned so much about set design, far beyond, it's much more than trying to make backdrops that look pretty. It's understanding how the set has to service the story, and particularly movement. And while I haven't really worked on set or production designs in quite some time, I did it quite a bit after college, but I've been in LA too long. It's an experience I've always valued, and as for Gesick, I miss him. So, but also, while in school, I studied a great deal of cinematography and directing, and you know, working on short films and documentaries, and that approach, I think, in many ways, is serviced by an artistic eye, and it's nice when you're working on illustration to have a certain cinematic approach. Photoshop is pretty much the essential tool everyone uses these days, and I use it extensively myself, but I don't like relying on it. You know, I think it should be a tool and not a crutch. I love the tangibility of paper and paint and pencil. That is the sense of accomplishment and joy for me. I compare some artists work almost exclusively now digitally, and many of them can't draw for their lives, but they do very elaborate work digitally, photographic manipulation and what have you. Some artists are able to do illustrations that look like they're handmade, but they're all exclusively digital, and that's wonderful. More power to them, but that's not my approach, and I have to go with what my heart tells me. And I recently did a poster, and someone commented she loved it, but she says, well, why didn't you just do it all in Photoshop? And I kind of rolled my eyes. I compare it to growing your own flowers versus going to a store and buying plastic ones. The end result might, look pretty from a distance, but there's something natural and I don't know if organic is a word that applies, but I like something that is hand created. I don't really feel much of an emotional involvement or attachment to pixels. Now that said, I use Photoshop extensively. It's helped me enormously in color correcting or making adjustments. It's also ironic now because my day job is working at a movie studio, essentially pushing pixels on movie posters and such. So that's how I make my primary living. The biggest challenge is starting. And a big frustration is when you have an idea that's so crystal clear in your head and trying to, for lack of a better word, articulate it, or taking the vision and making it, putting it down on paper. It's very, very frustrating. It's a lot harder than it looks, and because people only see the end result. They see the final piece, and that's it. They don't understand the process that's involved in coming up with an idea and making the idea. They don't see the mistakes along the way, and most artists don't show that process. And one of the things I like doing with my website is showing that process. I show people the mistakes because I'm not the best artist in the world. I think my strengths are much better in color and in painting than in actual drawing. And drawing I still need to polish up and have a lot of work. I primarily work in acrylics and colored pencil. I have worked a little bit in oils. I'm trying to explore and try different things. I'd like to get into, even try wood cutting, old-fashioned wood cutting, or even developing photographic negatives the old-fashioned way. Or silk screen printing. I think it's always a lot of fun. And there's a big movement now among illustrators trying to go for this retro style of, especially when it comes to movie posters, or Mondo posters. Everything looks like 50s, 60s, heavily influenced. It was all started by Saul Bass. But that's what everyone's doing nowadays, and because everyone else is doing it, I think it's probably best to, I'd like to learn how to do it, but to march to my own drum and keep doing what I've been doing, with actual brushes as opposed to, digital and Illustrator. It's actually a very cumbersome process, and I use it for embellishments, lighting effects and such, but for good gradients, it's really hard. I did one Harry Potter piece, for example, for a show 3 years ago, and the background, I worked very hard to make it look like it was an oil painting. It wasn't. It was acrylics. And the background sky was a gradient blue, which I used airbrushing. I don't have a studio. This is just my living room. So I was airbrushing here, and about a week or two later, I realized that I was just casually dusting a bookshelf, wiping my hand on it, and I noticed my hand was blue. And lo and behold, there was a thin layer of blue dust that had caked every item in my apartment, and I, pretty much was inhaling it all. As for the actual creative process itself, having to come up with ideas. I mean, if it's a commissioned work, it's, you know, how do I put it? The fewer people involved, the better. I often like, you know, if I have an idea I feel very strongly about, I really, really try to pitch that and run with it. If I did a series of book covers for an author, for example, who had very, very specific ideas about how he wanted certain things done. And I did a book cover for him, and I wasn't very happy with it. And it always was, it kind of nagged at me at the back of my mind. So I went up to him and I said, look, I'd like to redo it, and I'll do it for free. You don't have to pay me a dime. Just let me do it, but let me do it my way, and you're not going to be able to see it until it's done, or mostly done. So I did, and I worked, and I worked, and I worked, and it went through revision after revision after revision. And then I got some of his feedback, and he loved it. I loved it. It's actually one of my favorite pieces. But in the end, the publishing company opted to use, they actually preferred the original design that I had done. And that's the way it is. It's really frustrating when you're dealing with a committee, because you have a large group of people who have to decide, let's say, on a flavor of ice cream. No matter how exotic or fanciful the ideas they might come up with, the only thing they're all ultimately going to agree on is something like vanilla. And it's frustrating. Biggest compliments? Well, the one that really meant the most to me, I think, I did a piece, kind of a fan piece for The Secret of Nim. And I had given a copy of it to the directing animators Don Bluth and Gary Goldman. And I heard Bluth was very fond of it, and they have it in their office. And then, you know, I had a correspondence with them for quite some time, but I never actually met them face to face until sometime later at Comic-Con. And I walked up to them, and Gary Goldman looks at me, and he, before I even had a chance to open my mouth, he's like, "Adam McDaniel." And my jaw hit the floor, and that meant a lot to me. So. But I've gotten a lot of compliments on, you know, my Indiana Jones artwork. A lot of fans love it. I mean, people, I've seen people print copies. They have it on T-shirts. Some people have taken my work. I find it on bootleg DVDs. Every now and then I'll get an email from someone saying, "Hey, are you aware of this? eBay is selling one of your posters." And I'm like, well, that's news to me. Or other, like a printing company is selling T-shirts with my designs on them, you know, and I'm always the last to know. I guess it's the best form of flattery. Movie poster art is a dying art, and it's sad. It's been overtaken by the age of Photoshop and actors floating heads in space with no creativity. Again, made by committees rather than artists. And true artists and illustrators are now few and far between. And to those of them out there, you know, I salute you.